What's the creepiest, scariest thing you've ever seen, but no one believes you? When I was 7 or 8, I would have a recurring nightmare that one of my dolls came to life, played with me, and then would try to pull me into my closet with her. I'd follow her into the closet at first, but then she'd show me this little door at the back of the closet, and my heart would start to race. I don't know what it was about that door, but I knew something bad would happen if I went through it. I'd start to struggle and try to pull away, but the doll was too strong and would start pulling me through the door. At this point in the dream, I'd always wake up screaming. The worst part was I had night terrors, so sometimes I'd wake up standing next to my closet. Every night before bed, I'd make my parents make sure there wasn't a little door at the back of my closet. There never was. Anyway, I was talking to my mom the other day and this dream came up. I'm laughing about it and how ridiculously paranoid I was about dolls in that closet, but my mom gets really quiet. She tells me the creepy part of that dream wasn't the doll. It was the fact that there used to be a little door at the back of the closet, but when I was a 1-year-old, they remodeled the house and put a wall where the door used to be. There's no way I could have remembered that door, but years later, I kept dreaming about it. Didn't see it, but heard it. My friends and I got a cheap set of walkie-talkies from Walmart and we're playing around with them in the middle of the day. There's a bit of silence as we're trying to figure out the volume, and out of nowhere, there's a male voice saying, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," that comes through all of our walkie-talkies, and it definitely sounds like it was from one of those aircraft headsets. We try to answer back, but there's no response. I called non-emergency, but they said there weren't any reports of distressed aircraft or ships, or even if there were, they couldn't do anything about it. Alternatively, a couple months later, I saw a plane with an engine on fire go over my campus, but apparently no one else did. Just after high school, maybe 6 months or so after 9/11, I was a van driver who drove for Meals on Wheels to the place where they packaged up and were taken for home delivery. Anyway, the delivery van only had an FM radio and I was listening to 92.5, when all of a sudden the station cuts out and a transmission that can only describe as an American version of a number station began playing. It was seemingly random numbers followed by a long period of the same phrase repeated over and over again. The phrase was, "They took the crosstown bus. They took the crosstown bus. They took the crosstown bus," over and over again. Alright, buckle in. My neighbor was dying of a heart condition about 6 years ago. He knew he was, so he was giving away his valuables to people he trusted with them. Neighbor gave me his tackle box. He loved to fish. I'd see him come home from fishing every day and he'd just sit on his porch and skin fish. I just put the tackle box in my closet and didn't really do anything with it since I don't fish personally. Anyways, soon after, he passed away in his home. Exactly a week after that, I woke up to the tackle box at the foot of my bed. Weird, but my stepdad lights the around, figured it was him, so I put it back. The next morning, I wake up, it's at the foot of my bed again. So I asked my stepdad what the deal was, and he had no idea what I was even talking about. To test this, I put the tackle box in a different spot that he wouldn't find, nor would he attempt to get at. Under my bed, all the way in the back against the wall, and I put stuff in front of it to conceal it. Next morning, nothing. Okay, I guess it was him. Didn't give it much thought after that. 3 days pass, I wake up one morning, and there it is, at the foot of my bed. Now I'm starting to freak out, so I did what any rational person would do, and I went fishing with it. After I went fishing, I put the tackle box away, and it hasn't moved since. It's still there. The scariest thing I saw was at the age of 16. I woke up early in the morning, 4:30 to 5 a.m.-ish. Me and some friends were supposed to go to a road trip for the weekend. I look out my window and it's still kinda dark outside. I walk downstairs and see wet footprints all over the house, and suddenly a big man, like 6'7", I was around 6'1" at the time, just bolt past me and out the front door. Not really creepy, but I had at least 5 bricks and bolted upstairs to my dad. Nothing got stolen, but things were scattered all over the house. This happened to me, except I came home early from school and I caught them in the act. 2 skinny guys in all black with masks. Didn't seem to have any weapons. I was like 9 and had no idea what was going on, but I remember them saying, "Oh shit," and then they kind of all looked at me and one said, "It's a kid," and they all just bolted. It really felt like a scene from Barry. I don't know what Barry is. I called my mom and she called the police, and the police never found them because I told them absolutely no information because I'm a idiot. We then changed all the locks, put an extra deadbolt on the front door, and that's the story of how my family became gun owners. Didn't expect much humor in this thread. I woke up to something. It sounded like a door shutting. At first I thought it was a dream because I could hear it in the dream as I was waking up, kind of like when someone calls your name when you're dreaming. But when I looked at my cat, His hair was completely standing up and he was beaming at my bedroom door. This was the moment when I got really scared, because I know animals can pick up on that shit, and I thought he might know something's wrong. My cat doesn't do this type of thing unless there's a dog in the room. So I looked over at the door, and the only way I can describe it is it looked like it was swaying, slowly, like it was breathing, like someone was standing on the other side of it trying to hear if I was awake. This swaying was accompanied by a shadow. I don't mean a supernatural shadow, but it looked like the shadow of a person behind the door. I was paralyzed in fear. I lied there for 5 minutes naked watching this door away. I considered yelling and trying to scare them away, but I was terrified someone might actually respond. I legitimately thought this was the moment where I would have to defend myself or be killed. I don't own a gun, but after 10 minutes or so, I mustered up the courage to check every room in the house. I checked every corner too, but there was no one there. I don't know what happened, but my evolutionary traits kicked in and I completely believed someone was outside my door. This was 4 years ago. As I was walking on the sidewalk on a busy afternoon, I saw a suspicious boy about 18 years old. He was 10 meters away and walking what it looked like towards me. I kept my eyes on him despite the fact that he wasn't looking directly at me. His eyes were roaming, jumping from an object to an object. As we approached one another, half a meter away from each other, he takes out a knife and tries to stab me in my left side. He wasn't really fast, so I easily dodged it and immediately turned to see who he is, or if he's trying to stab me again. To my surprise, he keeps walking, and after a couple of meters, he stops, turns around, and smiles, gives me a thumbs up, and then continues walking in the opposite direction. Till this day, I don't know who he was, what he wanted, and even my family doesn't believe me, because if someone wanted to stab you, you can't stop them. You aren't experienced enough to dodge it like that. Fishing on Lake Minnewanka in Banff National Park with a good friend about 50 feet from shore. Around 8:30 p.m., I see red glowing eyes up in the trees, like red, like Predator, I guess. I do a double take. They're gone. I decide not to say anything. Maybe I'm tripping. Did just smoke up. Nope. 5 minutes later, my buddy says, I just seen some glowing red eyes up on the top of those trees. I feel goosebumps. Yep. I saw them too. We look back and they're gone. We decide to aim the boat towards the shoreline. It's not dark yet, but sun is going down. We saw nothing. No owls, no goats in the trails. We didn't get off the boat, but we had a good look around. When I ask him about this, it was about 10 years ago, he just says he doesn't want to talk about it. I can't blame him, but after all those years, I've never heard or seen anything like those glowing red eyes, 30 to 40 feet up in the trees, staring at us. I copy and pasted this next part. I knew nothing about the history when we went fishing there. For more than 100 centuries, people hunted and camped along the original shores of Lake Minnewanka. The Stony people call it Minwaki, or Lake of the Spirits. They respected and feared this lake for its resident spirits. The early Europeans call it Devil's Lake. I used to go camping there. I do not anymore. Mostly because it's bear country for most of the summer, but yeah, also because of those bright red eyes. I will never forget that. Most surreal thing I've ever seen. I saw a panther-sized black cat darting out of a water retention/artificial forest near school in the desert. Logically, it shouldn't be able to survive there, but holy shit, I saw it. Animal control wouldn't let that exist. There isn't really food enough for it, and the summers get dangerously hot if you've got black fur. Must have been 4 or 5 feet long. It doesn't make sense, but I 100% saw it, and so did the friend I was with. I grew up on a 2-acre home with plenty of trees and room for an 8-year-old to run around. Our house was also heated in winter by the wood fireplace, so we would periodically cut down one of our trees to save money. Well, for about 2 years, there was a stump less than a foot tall near the house, and at least once a day, without fail, I would see someone standing on the stump. Usually it was out of the corner of my eye, but once or twice I looked directly at him. I always looked away quickly because it startled me and he was gone. But my sister says she experienced the same thing. Nothing ever came of it though. Not quite sure how young I was at the time, but I was probably between 5 and 8. I was in my babysitter's bed at the time in her trailer park. It was 3 a.m. I had woken up because I had to pee. When I woke up, I looked down the hallway to see my babysitter leaning against the wall like one of the stereotypical cool guys do in movies. And I made eye contact and I felt my body go cold because she was still sound asleep next to me in bed. I went under the blankets trying to hide, and when I looked back, she was gone. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I've never told anyone. I just sat in her bed watching infomercials until 6 a.m. when she woke up. Never even really thought about sleeping there again. I honestly forgot how much this affected me until I started writing this. really freaked me out, man. I was walking to class from the dining hall on my campus when I saw a lady yelling for help and banging on a window of a nearby building. Lots of people were walking past, but I was the only one who seemed to acknowledge it. I went to the window to help, and she told me she was locked in a room in the building and that she needed me to come in and open the door. Now, I have no idea the layout of this building or where she was located, so I decided to call campus security for help despite her pleading with me not to call them and to just let her out. I call them, and when I hear them coming, I go to greet them so I can take them to the window. I leave for maybe a maximum of 15 seconds, and when I return with campus security, she's gone. We can't see her at the window, and campus security goes inside to double check and make sure there's no trace of her. Campus security definitely thought I was crazy, and I'm sure my professors thought I was full of shit when I explained to him why I was so late. No one seems to believe that this happened, but I swear it did. A similar thing happened to me in college as well, the difference being that this building was next door to my apartment, slightly off campus, and no one else was around except for my cousin who I was living with at the time. An old lady was tapping on the window to get our attention from a room on the second floor. When I walked up to the building, I yelled at her, asking what was wrong. I could see her mouthing words, but she wasn't yelling. It seemed like she was speaking normally, as if there wasn't a window and 20 feet in between us. After a couple of minutes, I found out that she was trapped inside a room on the second floor. I immediately assumed the worst and figured that she was being held against her will. I didn't see any cars in the driveway, so I decided I would go in. Before I went into the house though, I had my cousin get his cell phone out and dial 911, ready to hit send and complete the call should anything happen. I enter the building. The door opened to a dark, concrete hallway with old, dusty children's toys that looked like they were from the 70s, rocking horse, red wagon, etc., bunched up along the left wall. There were no other doors that I could see, only a spiral staircase at the end of the hallway. I started to climb the stairs, and as I reached the second floor, I saw her. The old lady that was tapping on the window was now sitting in a rocking chair watching some show in a very small black and white TV. The door to this room seemed more like a front door to a house than an interior door. It had glass panels from top to bottom. At this point, I was very confused. 3 minutes ago, she was just saying she was locked in this room. Now she's just watching TV? I knock on the door and she responds, "Come in." As I turn the handle and go to open the door, I notice that it is, in fact, locked. There's no deadbolt, and I'm turning the knob completely, so I know that it isn't locked. By now, the lady is standing right in front of me on the other side of the door, trying to open it as well. That's when I step back and notice a large screwdriver jammed into the floorboards on my end of the door, keeping the door from opening. Someone locked this woman in the room from the outside with a screwdriver. My mind is racing at this point. I make a quick attempt to pull the screwdriver out, but couldn't get it. I'm telling her I'm going to get help. I get the out of that building real quick and tell my cousin to call the police. The police show up and surround the building, guns drawn, then they enter. As they're entering, a car pulls into the driveway. A couple gets out of their car trying to figure out what was going on. It turns out this lady was their mother/mother-in-law and suffered from dementia. Every time they left the house, they would lock her in that room to prevent her from wandering off. After reading about the issue, I found that it's a fairly common, albeit illegal, thing for people to do in this situation. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyways, it was a nice night, uneventful trip, but when I got home, my roommate was coming out of the front door, coffee in hand and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going to work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me that it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I've never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5 something in the AM. My roommate left for work. I paced for circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors I had, no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened at that time. Not sure if this counts as creepy or overall scary, but it was weird. back in high school, I lived in a large apartment complex. It was maybe around 8 or 9 at night and completely dark. I was with a group of friends, 4 or 5 people. We were just talking and messing around with a friend's pair of walkie-talkies as we decided to look up in the sky as 2 fireballs, or what can only be described as fireballs, just appear in the sky and slowly move in a line. Just as that happened, we started getting what sounded like military communication over said walkie-talkies that was really static, but words came in every now and then. About 10 or so minutes later, the fireballs disappeared and the communication cut out. There was absolutely nothing about this on the news the next morning, and no one ever believed me. Footsteps and banging in my attic. For about 2 months, almost every night, I would hear from my attic, the steps are only like 5 feet from my room, small taps or footsteps. Then it gradually got louder, to the point it sounded like an audible foot was pressing on the wood. I told my dad, and he told me it was probably an animal that got up there or something. Thing is, my sister heard it too, as her bedroom was in the same hallway as mine. My dad might have been right, as he was completely gone after 2 to 3 months, and right now at 2 a.m., I don't hear it. I swear to God, if I hear it after I post this, I'm actually gonna piss my pants. Had my laptop in my bed just before going to sleep, not plugged in, on battery. Made an offhand comment on some website about how I wasn't scared of ghosts and didn't believe in them. Then I turned it off and went to sleep with the laptop beside me in my bed. Next morning, when I try to power it on, nothing happens, but the laptop feels unusually light. That's when I realized the battery had been physically removed and placed in my kitchen. I was alone in my apartment and do not have a history of sleepwalking at all. In the same room of my old house, I have seen a convulsing face floating outside my window. My brother has also seen it too. I saw the same face over a number of periods, and it would do stuff like smile and float closer and further from the glass. Our youngest brother a few years ago later complained that he didn't want to play with the boy in his room anymore as he was getting too much blood on his toys. It was the same room.